story that you are going to use, or I'm going to use for all the examples. It's super short, so it should be relatively understandable. You're going to have this model, so let's know the story. You are going to write about Sula, but here's where all my examples are going to come from. It's called Flu by Stuart Dybek. Faye's illness had transformed her in a way no diet or facelift could have. After days of nausea, vertigo, diarrhea, a fast of toast and tea, fever, dreams that came and went more like mirages, an aching lethargy that demanded 14-hour sleeping spells from which she'd wake confused, but only too aware of how terribly alone she was, Faye felt better. The usual grim weariness was gone from around her lips. Her eyes no longer peered out like a miner's from sallow tunnels smudged with mascara. They seemed enlarged with light, growing limpidly from her pale face. Even the shadow beneath her chin, where her darkness most accumulated, had burned away. It was as if everything unessential had burned away. "What happened to you?" Aldo blurted, startled by the sight of her sitting, legs crossed, back behind the reception desk. "Flu," Faye said. "Everybody's getting it. I mean, you sit up here in front all day and you're going to come in contact with everything anybody walks in with." "Everybody should get so sick," Aldo said. It seemed to Faye an odd remark at the time, but she ignored it and kept talking about the job, the weather, the flu epidemic. It was the first conversation she'd had since she'd been sick, and she clung to it, needing desperately to talk, aware the entire time of how Aldo was watching her. Ooh la la. And later, when people would ask them how they met and fell in love, it was always Aldo who would answer, "Flu." He'd smile earnestly. "It all started with flu. I still haven't recovered." Oh, that's so cute. So here's what I noticed. This is a story. It's literally just a story about a girl who gets sick. She comes back. And this boy talks to her. Maybe he hadn't noticed her until she was gone, and then he was like, "Wait, what happened to you?" And then she comes back, and then they eventually fall in love, right? So that's what the story's about. Some of the other things that I notice are that one, she's super alone at the beginning, but by the end, they're in love and they're happy. It may be as weird that after she was sick he came back and that's when they fell in love, and because he was like, "Oh my gosh, you look different." I don't love that, but I do love that something changed in here, right? She has this really really terrible thing that happened. She's super sick. I'm sure she's unhappy. It literally says she's lonely, but then out of this terrible thing, because it changed some other stuff, because then she came back and he was like, "Oh, where have you been?" Then they eventually fall in love, and so literally because of this terrible thing, something really good happens to both of them. So that's what I'm gonna build on when I read this story. So after you're done with Sula, what you should be thinking about is yeah, this is literally a story about a girl who, has a friend and then loses a friend and then maybe has a friend and then kills a guy, and then there are a lot of literal things, but maybe start to think about okay, what changes from the beginning of Sula to the end of Sula? What human truths can we see in there? Because I think that in this story in Flu, I think sometimes good things can come of bad things. Sometimes something really terrible happens, but then something amazing ends up happening because of that. So start to think about what might that thing be in Sula. And hopefully this story makes sense because I'm going to use it in all my examples.